Before I begin, I want to say a little bit about myself, in case you just think I'm just some random person on the internet. And after I say what I'm gonna say, you probably still will think I'm some random person on the internet, but I do have some credentials behind what I say. My undergraduate degree was in pre-law. The university that I went to, Grambling State University, did not know what pre-law really meant, so instead what they did is made me major in 4 different things: political science, history, psychology, and logic slash philosophy. As electives, I basically minored in STEM and business accounting, right? And the political science was a specialization in international politics. Let me repeat that. The political science major had a specialization in international politics. Why? Because the department head was Chinese. At a black university, the department head was Chinese. We also had a French guy. We also had a completely African guy who was literally acted as my father while I was there. And he would pull me aside and say I have to be twice as good as white people. That was his philosophy. So he acted like an African father. I don't know if you are familiar with African fathers, especially the rich version of that, but they are super duper strict. I went on to get a year and a master's in public administration with a specialization of hospital administration, but when I would have graduated, the market dried up for hospital administrators, and they had fired the hospital administrators, and they had the chief surgeon double as the hospital administrator, along with being chief surgeon. So I only did a year of that, and when the word came down, I just moved on to law school anyway. I did not complete law school because the scholarship, the full ride scholarship that I had from being so amazing, my grad GPA was 4.0. They didn't have 5.0, so I could only do 4.0, and the 4.0 was because that African professor also did most of the graduate work, and so I rewrote my paper like 50 times to the point where I was living, breathing, and functioning as a hospital administrator and giving the entire history of PPOs and all sorts of things for my 4.0. His whole deal was there was no other grade that I could get than a 4.0. I told you, African father, fantastic guy, can't remember his name, love him to death. Toughest teacher ever, love him to death. And children need structure, right? If you give them structure, they'll rise to the occasion. And I was a child of, 20 years old? Love him to death, can't remember his name, but that's simply because of the way my life was. I grew up in the State Department, went on to work for the State Department because of nepotism. I readily admit that. I worked in the State Department as a diplomat simply because my parents were diplomats. I was coming to visit my parents in Africa, and where they were stationed, and they said he needs a job, and they said okay. I didn't have to apply to the State Department or nothing. They just put me to work, and I oversaw 200 employees, which was more powerful than my actual mother at the time, which is kind of funny. I want to talk about Putin just for a second. A specialization in international politics with a degree in history. And of course, history was run out of the same department as political science. So we studied all sorts of histories of other countries. In fact, I don't know if I even took U.S. history in college. I can't remember. Growing up, I already knew U.S. history because you have to know U.S. history as a diplomat. You had to know where you came from so that you, in a foreign country, could react to and know the position of the United States. When the news talks about Putin, when Joe Biden talks about Putin, anybody in the media talks about Putin, they just paint him as this paper dictator. Oh, yeah, he's the president of Russia. Please, I'm not going to say anything about Putin. I'm just going to say, please research his history. And I'm going to say this. You do not want to make Putin mad. Oh, you think he's mad? He's not mad. In fact, he's been quite level-headed. He's been quite level-headed for the past, 20 years. That region, Eastern Europe, and the EU have been doing stuff to Russia, and I guess indirectly Putin, which I guess would offend Putin, so he's reacting to that. Let me repeat that. Putin is reacting to stuff that they have done to Russia. I'm not saying what needs to be said, because I'm trying to be very careful here. Putin is reacting. He's not the aggressor. He's being reactionary. And I'll say this again so you understand. He's not upset yet. Also, the structure of the military in Russia is very different than the structure to the United States. In the United States, Joe Biden is the commander-in-chief. In Russia, Putin is not the commander-in-chief. Did you know that? This is how we have an uprising by a general in Russia because of the structure of the military in Russia. In Russia, the generals absolutely do not have to obey Putin at all. He can make suggestions, and they can or cannot agree with it. Or I'm sure they may or may not agree with it. So far, Putin has not pressed the button. He's not angry. He's been very level-headed. There is a lot of propaganda going on about everything going on over there. And when I say over there, I mean all of Eastern Europe and the EU. I'm being very general, so nobody can say, oh, he gave you misinformation. No, I'm telling you, go research the history of Putin, Vladimir Putin. Go and research the man, his history. He is not mad at all. He's not upset at all. I've watched him. I've seen his meetings. I've seen his press conferences. He comes prepared. He has notes. He has actual documentation of everything. Everything. He has receipts of everything. I need water. I just don't want people to be hoodwinked. I don't want the misinformation that's going on about everything that is going on around the world to be as it is. Putin also is a member of BRICS, right? And the African nations have a completely different take on Russia and Putin. Completely different. You have EU journalists going over and interviewing African leadership and saying, are you against Putin? And the African leaders are saying, Putin's never done anything to us. In fact, he's quite nice. He's building roads, offering loans, offering money, offering assistance, offering partnership. He has done absolutely nothing that we would be mad at all. And the African nations are saying, I know that you all are upset, but you all being upset has nothing to do with Africa. You all want everything to be all about you, but it's not all about you. We're sovereign nations. We're not upset at Putin. And that's what they said. I found it very refreshing to hear something non-propagandist in the news. I'm sure they were not very happy to even report that, but I'm sure outlets like Al Jazeera would report that, and they had no choice but to report it. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share the video. I don't even think this is monetized, so if you share it, we'll actually have some monetization and we could do more with the channel. Thank you all for watching.